Hello, everybody, and welcome back to today's episode of Grey's Anatomy. We are continuing off from where we left off, breaking new ground into a third video about market equilibrium. Where we left off was looking at problems where there are multiple changes describing the same problem. So I'm going to work on number one here. What happens to market price, so market equilibrium price and quantity, if consumer income goes up and the wage rate rises? So I'm going to draw my initial equilibrium like this. So here's the initial demand curve. Here's the initial supply curve. Our initial equilibrium, therefore, is at the point of intersection, right here, the green point. Okay, so there are two changes described here. So consumer income goes up. Okay, so does that affect consumers or producers? And does it make the demand curve shift inward? Well, I guess now you know it's a demand curve. Is it going to make the demand curve shift? I like that word, shift. Shift inward or outward? The answer is that it's going to shift demand outwards if consumers if consumer income goes up. That's an outward shift of the demand curve. So choose a different color. So the new demand curve might be out here. So demand shifts outward like this. And then the second change described in the problem is that, why did I write this problem? Wage rates go up. I've been able to say it a few times and it's done all right, but okay, wage rates go up. So does that affect consumers or producers, and does it cause the curve to shift inwards or outwards? The answer is that it affects producers, and it's going to raise their marginal cost. So the supply curve is going to shift up or inwards, however you want to think about it. So the new supply curve will be like this because costs went up. Right. So the new equilibrium is right here. So we've gone from the original equilibrium point at A to the new equilibrium point at B. So what happens to equilibrium price and quantity? So we know for sure that equilibrium price goes up. Right? Point B is definitely higher up than point A was. What happens to equilibrium quantity is ambiguous. So we actually cannot tell just from this drawing whether equilibrium quantity would go up or down. Depending on the steepness of the demand and the supply curve, point B could have ended up to the right of point A, so that would have been an increase in quantity exchanged. Or depending on the steepness of the equations, point B could have ended up to the left of point A. There are two factors going against each other here. Consumer incomes have gone up, which would normally mean that the quantity exchange should go up because people can afford to buy more. But at the same time, wage rates went up, and that would raise costs and shrink supply. So those two things are going to counterbalance each other to some effect, to some extent. On one hand, consumers are prone to consume more. On the other hand, producers are going to want to produce less because their costs went up. And so for the quantity exchange, we're not sure whether it goes up or down. So the market quantity is ambiguous. Okay. Okay, so let's look at the second example over here. So again, we start with the same initial scenario. Here's our original demand curve. And here's our original supply curve. So here's our initial equilibrium point. Okay, so what happens to market price if the price of a complement drops and capital becomes more efficient? Okay, so if the price of a complement drops, is that going to affect supply or demand? And is it going to create an outward shift or an inward shift? Okay, so this is going to affect demand because the prices of substitutes and complements always affect demand. So if the price of a complement drops, that is going to shift this demand curve outwards. So complementary goods are goods that I usually consume with the good we're looking at here. So this would be like if the good we're looking at is peanut butter and the price of jelly fell, I'm going to be able to consume more peanut butter. So we're going to get an outward shift in demand. Right? If capital becomes more efficient, so if the factory machines that package peanut butter or something like that become more efficient, that's going to lower the supplier's costs. So you're going to get an outward shift in the supply curve. So the new equilibrium is going to be over here at point B. This is where the new demand curve and the new supply curve meet. So in this case, what happens to the market equilibrium? Well, in this case, it is unambiguous that the quantity exchange is going to go up. So the equilibrium quantity increases. In this case, the change in the equilibrium price is ambiguous. So there are two effects going on here when you're thinking about price. On one hand, the price of a complement going down increases consumer demand. So if nothing else were shifting, that would drive up the price because consumers want more of it. They're willing to pay more, and that would drive up the price to right around here. But then the other effect you have is that producers' costs are going down. So that force will tend to drive the market price back down. So we're not sure which of those two effects is going to win. So the equilibrium price is equilibrium. We don't know if that's going to go up or down, so the change is ambiguous. Again, if we had the exact equations, we could figure it out and know for sure, and we'll see some examples like that later. But when you're just doing these graphical analysis problems, we can't tell just from the description here whether the price is going to go up or down. We do know that the equilibrium quantity will go up. So here's a case that's where both of them are unambiguous, both supply and demand. I'm just going to sketch it here. So we've got our original demand curve, we've got our original supply curve. Okay, so let's say that the two changes that were happening were that consumer income goes down and the rental rate, I'm not going to do the other one, goes up. Okay, so both of these effects tend to contract the quantity that both sides want. So like when consumer income goes down, consumers are going to demand less, so the demand curve is going to shift inwards. When the wage rate, I didn't even write it, it's actually the rental rate. When the rental rate of capital goes up, that increases supplier costs. So the marginal cost curve, costs are going to go up. This is the new equilibrium. So here, the change in quantity is unambiguously goes down. The change in price is ambiguous because we don't know whether the price is going to go up or down. So there you go. Okay, so moving on from just graphical analysis questions, now we actually have some equations. So here we have a demand function. So this is similar to some of the demand functions we saw when we did the demand unit. The quantity demanded depends on the consumer's income, the price of a related good, and the price of this good X. So this is demand for good X. And we're told initially income is $100 and the price of related good is $15. So if we plug in we get that quantity demanded, function of px, whoop, that's not an equal sign. You get 100 plus 3 times 100 is the income we start at, minus 2 times 15 is the price of y, minus 5 px. When you simplify that, you get 100 plus 300, which is 400, minus 30, which is 370. All right, so that's our initial demand function, 370 minus 5px. All right, so then we have a supply function given here. The quantity supplied is obviously dependent on the price of good X, and the coefficient is positive. The higher the price for good X is, the more suppliers want to supply. And then we have this other variable T. It represents the technological state of production technology. So the higher it is, the more technologically advanced the firm is. Okay, so we're told that the initial value for T is 0. Okay, so the quantity supplied is going to be 50 plus 0 plus 3 times px. So our initial equilibrium price and quantity we get just by setting these two equations equal to each other. So in equilibrium, the amount demanded, the quantity demanded, is equal to the quantity supplied. So 370 minus 5 px is equal to 50 plus 3 px. Okay, so if we solve for this, we get 8 px equals 320, and the original equilibrium price is going to be 40. All right. Okay, so then how do we figure out the original equilibrium quantity? We're going to plug that price back into either one of the two equations. So I'll plug it back into the supply equation. Supply equals 50 plus 3 times 40. And I believe that is 170 units. Yep, okay. So part B, assume the price of the related good increases to $35 and that production technology improves so that T equals 4. Compute the new equilibrium price and quantity and the change in consumer and producer surplus. So let's just start with the equilibrium because I think that's all we're going to have time for in this video. So we're going to go back and change the equations to reflect the new values. So if we go back to our original demand function, income is going to be, so it's still 100. Income is still going to be $100. That's not changing, so you get 3 times 100. PY is now going to be 35 instead of 15. So the new demand function is going to be 100 plus 300, which is 400, minus 70. So we're going to get 330 minus 5 px. So this is, like an inward shift of the demand curve. Because the coefficient on py is negative, does that mean that y is a substitute or a complement for good x? I'll let you put that in play posit. Okay, so on the supply side, we're going to get 50, but now T is equal to 4. So it's going to be 56 plus 3px. And to solve for equilibrium, we're going to set the new supply curve equal to the new demand curve. So demand was 330 minus 5px. Oh, I'm running out of time. And we're going to set that equal to 56 plus 3px. Okay, so go ahead and put the answers in play posit. I'm going to pause this and the right answer will appear in a second. Okay, so the work is on the screen here. The equilibrium price is $34.25, and the equilibrium quantity is 158.75. Notice because we have the values we can compare against the original, nothing is ambiguous. We know that equilibrium price went down and quantity